Breaking news, there is more fallout from the release of millions of files related to convicted sex offender and suspected sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Another bombshell arrest, and once again, it is happening across the pond. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, real quick, if you're into content creation, if you're putting things out on social media, have you ever wondered how we're able to put so many of our clips out there so quickly on all these trending cases? Well, we use something called Opus Clip, okay? This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it so easy to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio. It is so easy. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar. You sign up, you upload, and in minutes you have perfectly edited clips ready to go. For TikTok, Shorts, Reels, Opus Clip is your one-stop shop. And having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to get a free week and then 50% off. Well, I will tell you, the fallout from the Epstein scandal is just continuing and continuing and continuing. I mean, we did a whole episode on all of the resignations and the investigations. Hey, I mean, we just covered a major arrest of a member of the British royal family, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what just happened? This is major. Lord Peter Mandelson, former UK ambassador to the United States, is now under arrest. British police announced Monday that a 72-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Now, this is a little bit different than what we do here in the United States. So first, sometimes you have an arrest and then charges. We don't see official charges as of yet. And also, I will tell you what's different is the UK police, they typically don't name the subjects of investigations, but the subject of this particular case has been previously identified as Mandelson. And the way they describe it, I think you can put two and two together. However, I will tell you, despite the fact that the allegations against him are indeed or seemingly connected to Jeffrey Epstein, he has not been accused of committing any sort of sexual crimes or sex trafficking as far as we know, okay? The accusations, as far as we can tell, mirror those actually against former Prince Andrew. You see, Mandelson is accused of passing secret government information along to Jeffrey Epstein more than a decade ago. According to a statement from the Metropolitan Police, Mandelson was taken to a police station for an interview. There are search warrants that were served at 2 addresses in connection with this case. So I said that, he's accused of passing sensitive information to Epstein when he was serving as business secretary from 2008 to 2010. There are also allegations, by the way, of financial transfers that we'll talk about. Although, to be clear, we cannot confirm that this is in fact the basis of the arrest at this point. And to be clear, there's no charges that have been filed yet. But this isn't the first time that Mandelson has been in the hot seat. Not the first time that we've covered him here on Sidebar. He was fired from his diplomatic post by his boss, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, back in September. That is when the U.S. House Oversight Committee released images of a 50th birthday album that was put together back in 2003 for Jeffrey Epstein's birthday, reportedly by his on-again, off-again girlfriend, associate, now convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. And in his part of the birthday book, Mandelson apparently included several photos of himself and Epstein, as well as a note that said Jeffrey was his, quote, best pal, allegedly signed it, "Happy birthday, Jeffrey, we love you." I mean, that's backed up by this email from seemingly Mandelson to Epstein. "Nat mentioned you at lunch, and she erased my comment that you are one of my best friends." Now, I'm sure while those emails are important, I'm not really sure that's why he's getting arrested. Yeah, there's been questionable things, and I'll get into it, about the exchanges between him and Epstein. Like, for example, Mandelson had even seemingly or allegedly suggested at one point that Epstein's conviction for solicitation of a minor back in 2008 was wrongful and that it should be challenged. Now, of course, Mandelson underwent an extensive vetting process before he was selected to be the ambassador to the United States, but it's been reported that his prior ties to Epstein had been known, but apparently significantly downplayed. This is according to reporting like outlets like AP News. Now, like others who had been connected to Epstein or affiliated with Epstein, Mandelson said he regretted any interactions that he might have had with Epstein 20 years ago, swore he knew nothing about his criminal activities or his alleged criminal activities. But as more and more documentation was released by the Department of Justice, Mandelson's connection to the convicted sex offender was called into question. I'm going to give you an idea. I want to read you some communication. So you have this exchange from 2009, and it allegedly surrounds Epstein's release from prison. And this is after he served 13 of his 18-month sentence. And again, it's those Florida state charges: solicitation of prostitution with a minor under 18. It's part of that guilty plea. Here's how that went. From Jeffrey Epstein, seemingly to Mandelson: free and home. Mandelson appears to write back: how shall we celebrate? Epstein writes back: with grace and modesty. Those are the names of two strippers. Mandelson allegedly writes back at one point: how is freedom feeling? Epstein writes back: she feels fresh, firm, and creamy. And then Mandelson appears to write back to Jeffrey Epstein: naughty boy. But again, I don't really think that this is why he's reportedly getting arrested. You see, the Metropolitan Police, they launched this investigation into Mandelson for allegedly providing Epstein with information, market-sensitive information, government information, when he was acting as business secretary in the British government. For example, you have this email from June 2009 where Mandelson appears to write to Epstein: interesting note that's gone to the PM, meaning Prime Minister. So it appears to be this note that was sent to the Prime Minister about business issues and a plan of action, including the sale of assets. And this is to which Epstein appears to write back: what saleable assets? How about this one, where Mandelson allegedly gave Epstein a heads up that a 500 billion euro bailout had been agreed to tackle the Eurozone crisis. So you got this email from Jeffrey Epstein, again to Peter Mandelson: sources tell me 500 B euro bailout almost complete. And Mandelson appears to write back to Epstein: SD be announced tonight. How about this one? Email exchange in 2009 about Epstein seemingly asking Mandelson to petition the government to amend the upcoming bank bonus tax. Epstein writes: any real chance of making the tax only on the cash portion of the banker's bonus? And from, again, who appears to be Peter Mandelson to Epstein: trying hard to amend, as I explained to Redacted last night. Treasury digging in, but I am on the case. Last year, Mandelson said to the Financial Times: I regret ever meeting him or being introduced to him by his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell. I regret even more the hurt he caused to many young women. Now, according to the outlet The Standard, Mandelson stepped down from the House of Lords after the most recent release of Epstein documents, but parliamentary procedure lets him keep his title, at least for now. Now, according to Time, I have to mention this too as we talk about what the investigation could be about, the Epstein files also apparently show these financial transfers from Epstein to Mandelson-affiliated accounts as well. So we'll see if anything comes from that. But remember, this is all happening in the wake of what I mentioned before: another major arrest in the UK, the arrest of formerly Prince Andrew. Now, to give you a context about that, here's our former sidebar episode, our previous sidebar episode on all of that. Take a look.
If you've been watching the news today, you have heard that the Thames Valley Police arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, on suspicion of misconduct in public office. This carries potentially life in prison. It happened reportedly just after 8 a.m. local time. 6 unmarked police vehicles show up at Andrew's place. Oh, and he was taken into custody on his 66th birthday. Now, he remains in custody at the time of this recording. At this point, it doesn't appear he's officially been indicted, so just arrested on suspicion of this charge. But I will tell you, if the charges follow, okay, this would mark, it's already been marked, a historic moment. You have a senior member of the British royal family arrested in connection with actions tied to official government duties. Now, the Thames Valley Police issued a statement early on that read: as part of the investigation, we have today arrested a man in his 60s from Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office and are carrying out searches at addresses in Berkshire and Norfolk. The man remains in police custody at this time. Now, that's standard for authorities over there to not identify the person that they arrested. But King Charles III, so we're talking about Andrew's brother, later released a statement, okay? And this is what it said: I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. As this process continues, it would not be right for me to comment further on this matter. My family and I will continue in our duty and service to you all. So basically, in my view, that's the king saying, Andrew, you're on your own. We cannot even have the appearance of being involved in this. We cannot have even the appearance that we're affecting this investigation or tainting this investigation or getting involved in this investigation. And I would say this is not surprising considering what? Andrew's already been stripped of his royal titles. He was already ostracized by the family by all accounts. And I want to back up on that for a second, because if you're just hearing this now, you might be probably thinking, wait a second. Andrew was arrested. Is this about Jeffrey Epstein? Is this about allegations of sex crimes? No, this is about Epstein. There is an arrest, but it's not in the way that you think, okay? So it starts off, just to give you some background, Jeffrey Epstein. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, Epstein, as we know, cultivated relationships with politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and royalty. One of those relationships was with Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II. They were photographed together. Andrew stayed at Epstein's homes, apparently. They moved in overlapping circles through Epstein's then girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, or associate Ghislaine Maxwell. And for years, it was framed as very controversial and as bad judgment. Embarrassing, maybe not criminal. Then in 2015, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit alleging that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked her and that she was forced to have sex with Andrew, including when she was just 17 years old. Now, Andrew denied the allegations, denied meeting her, questioned the authenticity of a photo showing them, or seemingly showing them together. In 2019, he attempted to repair the PR damage with that now infamous BBC Newsnight interview. You know, the pizza alibi, the claim that he couldn't sweat. It collapsed almost immediately. And within days, Queen Elizabeth removed him from public duties. In 2022, he settled Giuffre's civil lawsuit for an undisclosed amount, admitted no liability. And after that, it seemed like the story might be over. Andrew kind of retreated from public life. But here's the thing. The Epstein story didn't die. Andrew was actually stripped of his royal titles, and then in January of 2026, the U.S. Department of Justice released another massive dump of Epstein files. And buried in those documents was something that shifted the focus entirely. This brings us to what we're talking about today. It was about Andrew's official government role. Between 2001 and 2011, Andrew served as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. This is a formal government position. It's a trade envoy, a crown servant. And in the released communications, the emails, it seems that investigators found messages suggesting that Andrew allegedly shared official trip reports and what appeared to be a confidential investment brief, so sensitive information, with Jeffrey Epstein, and that this was in 2010. So this was 2 years after Epstein's 2008 conviction in Florida. Remember, solicitation of prostitution, remember, of a minor too? And that detail matters because in 2010, Andrew wasn't just a royal family member, he was serving in an official government capacity. And under UK law, crown servants are bound by duties relating to the handling of sensitive government information. The Official Secrets Act of 1989, which is the relevant version here, specifically protects information relating to international relations. That's the key. That seems to be what investigators are now examining. Now, this arrest itself, it isn't under the Official Secrets Act, at least not yet, but it has been reported that Andrew has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. That is a separate common law offense, carries its own legal threshold. The Crown Prosecution Service, so the main prosecutorial arm out in the UK, defines it this way. A public officer acting as such commits the offense if they willfully neglect their duty or willfully misconduct themselves to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office holder without reasonable excuse or justification. And the Court of Appeal has described the threshold as a high one, that you're talking about conduct that is, quote, so far below acceptable standards as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more about what that means. But in Andrew's case, the alleged misconduct is the sharing of sensitive government information with a private citizen, Jeffrey Epstein, who should not have received this, right? That seems to be what the main argument would be. And I want to walk you through how we got to this arrest, because after the January 2026 document dump, there were emails that surfaced from 2010. So again, 2 years after Epstein's conviction. And they showed what appeared to be ongoing communication between Epstein and someone identified in the files as the Duke. Now, the Duke presumably Andrew, the Duke of York. And here's what those emails purportedly contain. November 30th, 2010, Andrew's special advisor, Amit Patel, sends him an email, and it reads, "Sir, please find attached the visit reports for Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen in relation to your recent visit to Southeast Asia." And attached are official documents, government records generated seemingly during Andrew's work as the UK's trade envoy. According to the files, Andrew appears to have forwarded those reports, the email, their contents, to Jeffrey Epstein. And there's no forwarding message, no context given. There's another email from December 24th, 2010, so Christmas Eve. Andrew appears to write to Epstein and includes what he describes as a confidential brief on investment opportunities in Afghanistan's Helmand province. And here's what the email says. So first of all, it says to J, and then it ends from A. Attached is a confidential brief produced by the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand Province for international investment opportunities. These are not exclusive to Helmand Province, but principally focused on that province. I'm going to offer this elsewhere in my network, including Abu Dhabi, but would be very interested in your comments, views, or ideas as to whom I could also usefully show this to attract some interest. I have sadly already found out that Gates Foundation doesn't do anything in Afghanistan. So at this time, Helmand Province in 2010, this is our understanding, this was at the height of the war in Afghanistan, and there were British troops that were on the ground there. And Andrew is allegedly sending information about this to Jeffrey Epstein. So it kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. You have a former prince, the king's brother, arrested on his birthday, police searching royal properties too, by the way, we'll talk about that, and a criminal investigation into whether sensitive government information was improperly shared with a convicted sex offender. Now, the late Virginia Giuffre, her family released a statement today. And you'll remember, I mentioned this, Giuffre was the woman who alleged that Epstein trafficked her to Andrew. And by the way, her posthumous memoir kept this story alive. Her family said, "At last, today our broken hearts have been lifted at the news that no one is above the law, not even royalty. He was never a prince. For survivors everywhere, Virginia did this for you." I want to talk about this. Okay, let me bring in my friend Richard Schoenstein, litigator, trial attorney. Okay, your reaction to what? The first senior royal to ever be arrested? This is a big development in the Epstein saga. So first, your reaction to this news.
So my reaction to the news is, really? This guy's been under suspicion of sex trafficking and sexual abuse for years and years and years. But the thing that's made the British government angry is he maybe gave away some money secrets. And that's what they're going to prosecute him for.
The argument would be, isn't this probably the more straightforward path to prosecution than sex-related crimes if you just look at the emails?
It is probably more straightforward, and there may be a higher degree of proof. I give you that. But, no one is facing consequences for what went on that island. And so now this guy's going to be prosecuted because he sent an email with some trade secrets?
Well, I want to get into that. But I guess the question is, in the overall scheme, and look, you're right, he hasn't been officially charged with respect to any sex-related crimes. I hear you. But in the idea of releasing the Epstein files, transparency, accountability. Talked earlier about the statement from Virginia Giuffre's family. There are those who say, okay, this is a measure of some sort of accountability for someone having a connection to Jeffrey Epstein. And again, look, he hasn't been officially indicted, at least at the time of this recording. He hasn't been officially charged or found guilty. But obviously people are looking at this, and I did a full episode about what's accountability, people resigning, information coming out, ridicule, investigations. This is something. This is something against the former prince. I mean, it wasn't just that he was stripped of his titles and was essentially banished. Now there's an investigation.
Yeah, well, it's something. It's potentially something. And I think that the being stripped of his title and his royal duties was somewhat significant, and probably a more significant step than anything we've seen in the United States, where we refuse to release the full files, we refuse to do anything about it, we just ignore it or downplay it. So there's something being done, and if it makes some of the survivors or their families, if it alleviates some of what they've had to suffer over the years, then I'm happy for it. I just think it's a little off target.
I mean, he could be looking at life in prison. I'm not sure that's exactly what would happen, but there is a possibility.
Well, that's the other thing, Jesse. We have to see how it plays out. I mean, bringing, as you know, I mean, you follow more of these cases than anybody, bringing charges and getting a conviction and putting someone in jail, those 2 points are far removed, and we have to see what happens with this process going forward. It was interesting. It was a surprise.
It's a surprise. Well, here's the thing. We did an episode on Epstein's connection to the royals. We knew there was some sort of investigation. I was not expecting a full-blown arrest and now potential charges. I did look up what the Crown Prosecution Service says about misconduct in public office, and the Crown Prosecution Service is the main prosecuting arm in Britain. So to be clear, we're talking about arrest under suspicion. There hasn't been a formal charge yet. We'll see if that actually develops. They have to gather and assess evidence, which let's talk about what they might be searching at the properties. But first, if you talk about a charge, it is a public officer. So here I think they'd be able to say that, right? He was acting as an official government envoy. This public officer willfully neglects to perform their duty and or willfully misconducts themselves, that this amounts to an abuse of public trust, and there is no reasonable excuse or justification. Now, what is some of the evidence that may be used here? Well, there's an alleged email where Andrew allegedly shares files that are marked as confidential brief with Epstein on potential investments in southern Afghanistan. By the way, British forces were based there. Now, Andrew allegedly said at the time that, look, I was just seeing comments or views or ideas that maybe Epstein might have had to attract interest. I think that's what it was reported. There's also this allegation that Andrew forwarded his official reports on his visits to Asia that was sent to him by his special advisor to Epstein just minutes after he got them. No forwarding message, no context. So when we go back to what the law, I looked this up. It says that this public officer had to have been acting as such. So it needs to be distinguished from somebody who is merely acting while a public officer, but more acting as a public officer. So in that context is where they allegedly engaged in misconduct. There has to be a nexus between the willful neglect, the breach of duty, the willful misconduct, and that power, that authority, those responsibilities. What does willful mean? According to the Crown Prosecution Service, willful means deliberately doing something which is wrong, knowing it to be wrong, or with reckless indifference as to whether it is wrong or not, that this person was aware of the duty and knew that the way in which they carried out or neglected that duty was capable of reaching the seriousness threshold that amounts to misconduct. So you don't have to prove that the defendant themselves came to that view. All you have to show is that they had the means available to them to make such an assessment, or that the defendant was reckless. And in order to establish this is a serious issue, the seriousness of the effect, it's whether the conduct amounted to a serious abuse of the public's trust, and that not every willful neglect of duty or misconduct is going to reach that bar. It is a high bar of seriousness, but you have to basically say, and this is, I'm reading a quote, an affront to the standing of the public office held. The threshold is a high one requiring conduct so far below acceptable standards as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office holder. And this is going to be determined by a jury. So, Rich, I threw a lot at you. I guess the question is, what are some things you're going to be looking out for to determine, is this a serious breach of trust, misconduct in public office based on what we're seeing right now?
Well, that was a great summary and good research of what it would require to prove these charges. So I think this is an interesting case because to me, willfulness seems kind of obvious. If he was giving away information that he had no right to give away to Jeffrey Epstein, that seems fundamentally willful. But the big question here that the courts will have to ponder before it even gets to a jury is, was this really in furtherance of his official duties? And I don't know enough about what his official duties were at the time as a prince and whatever other offices he held to know if passing on this information could have arguably been part of the duty. He's going to say, I think, this really had nothing to do with my official duties. I was providing some information to a friend on his request that I had access to. I wasn't trying to negotiate with Epstein on behalf of the United Kingdom. I wasn't trying to transact business. I wasn't representing the crown. I was just passing on some data the guy asked for. I did not have any ill intent. etc. And even though a jury might conclude you had no business passing on that confidential governmental information to this maniac, was it part of his official duty? I think that to me is the toughest part of the case.
So I think that's the easiest part. I think he's in a position where he gets this information. He's handing it over, or allegedly handing it over. I guess the question is, what was he gaining out of this? Like, whether even it rises to the seriousness or whether it rises to the level of what he would be punished. I looked up the Crown Prosecution Service. They said some of the things to factor in is, did the conduct involve the exploitation or attempted exploitation of vulnerable people? Did the conduct have an operational impact that harmed the public interest or undermined public trust either in the role held by the suspect or the relevant public service or institution? What was the suspect's motive? Was it personal gain? What was the severity of the actual or likely consequences? Was there a risk of death or serious injury? How egregious was the abuse of power? Did the willful misconduct or breach of a duty have the effect of benefiting the wider public interest rather than being injurious to it? So I guess if you look at a textbook example, if he gave up like the location of British forces and he did it for money and they got killed, that's like textbook, throw the book at him, right? This one, I'm curious, like, what did he have to gain by it? Who was harmed by it? I think those are the things that I'm looking out for.
So, right. So this is a financial crime, right? Because it's trade information. It's information about transactions on behalf of the United Kingdom. Is that the way you understand it? That's the way I understand it.
That's the way I understand it. I mean, if you're in a position where you're getting this material and you're sharing it, and you could say, just in and of itself, that's breaching his responsibilities, his duties. This is confidential information or sensitive information. That I think is a level. I just don't know.
It's like an insider. It's like an insider trading case.
A little bit,
who are you harming when you give away secrets of a company so that someone can make decisions about buying and selling stock with more information than others? You're harming the other stockholders, or in this case, you're potentially harming the United Kingdom itself because you're providing somebody with secret information that they can enact trades on. Now, a question I would have on either side of this case is, did Jeffrey Epstein use this information? What did he do with it? Did he pass it on? Did he trade on it? If he traded on it and made some financial gain, then that's to the financial detriment of somebody else, potentially of the United Kingdom or of others who were involved in the trading. So there could be, or the public. So there very well could be victims, just as there are in insider trading and other kinds of financial fraud cases.
I guess the other thing is whether or not he had authorization to share this allegedly sensitive government material. And I wonder if he'd say, look, there was nothing so confidential about it and I couldn't share it, or maybe it was public knowledge or was about to be.
Right.
That might be tough, but I think that does go into whether or not this is a deliberate breach of official duty.
Yeah, in a case involving disclosure of confidential information, you're always going to look at, is that information truly confidential? Does it exist somewhere else in the public forum? Was it obtainable by Jeffrey Epstein from somebody else? Or was it stale at the time it was released? What measures did the government take to protect the confidentiality of that information? That goes to both whether it was confidential and the level of Andrew's misconduct in Fenny. If he didn't know it was a secret, I mean, I don't know how he would know, but if he
Especially
didn't know
if it's labeled confidential or something like that. Yeah.
Well, right. You always look, where is the information kept? How is it marked? How is it stored? You always look at stuff like this. So it's an interesting case. I mean, I was a little hard on it on the outset because I think there are more important issues here arising from these Epstein files. But the case itself is interesting from the perspective of just a business fraud case and how you would prosecute something like that.
What I'm about to say, I want to be clear. I am not making this comparison on its face, but I guarantee you, as this comes up today, you are going to hear the term Al Capone.
I thought of the same thing. You're absolutely going to hear that.
I mean, seriously, It's like you couldn't get him on the other stuff. It was tax-related crimes, right? So again, I'm sure you're going to hear that today. Not making the comparison that Prince Andrew's anywhere in the realm of Al Capone, but whatever. Anyway, look, there are two addresses that were reportedly searched by authorities. You have one in Berkshire, one in Norfolk. He had lived in Windsor Royal Lodge in Berkshire earlier this month. Now he has this new home in Sandringham, this estate in Norfolk. Two parts about this. What do you think they're looking for in connection with this alleged crime? And B, I don't know the whole rules of UK law, but assuming it's similar to what we have here in the United States, what happens if they find something else during the course of their search that's not related to the current breach, the alleged breach of trust?
You asked the best question. So I'll take the easier one. The first question's easier. What they're looking for is anything with a plug or anything that can plug into something, right? Any computer, any tablet, any phone, any external media, any device that might have data on it or might have evidence of things that were sent to or received from Jeffrey Epstein or anybody else, or might show where he kept this kind of data, or if he was harvesting it and maintaining it in some form. So they're looking for all of that. I mean, I doubt they're looking for physical printouts of confidential information. That doesn't seem very likely. But usually these days, when you bust into a home in a case like this, you're going to carry out every computer you can find and hand it over to people who know how to search them. Your second question is much harder. What happens if they carry out a computer and they find, 10 metric tons of pornography? I don't know the answer to that. That doesn't seem to fit the crime and the elements that you outlined, which is probably part of the British government's answer to why are you prosecuting this potentially, but you didn't prosecute the other stuff. That's because this particular crime, if it was committed, is actually a crime if it's carried out by a public official. And that's why they feel they can go after it, plus the evidence. So if other stuff comes out, I don't know. I mean, I think we know everything we need to know about Andrew already in that regard, but we'll see.
It gets complicated because here in the United States, when you have a search warrant that is very specific for what you're looking for, but you discover evidence of other criminality, it's not like it can just be ignored. So I'm curious. I don't know what else they might find, but something I had to address. Okay, by the way.
Yeah, if you go in with a search warrant, and you find like bodies in the house,
I mean,
you
it's
can
not
prosecute that.
Yeah, it's not like they're like, well, it wasn't in the search warrant. We're just going to ignore it. Let me ask you this. You saw the statement from the king, okay? Basically, it's like, Andrew, you're on your own, right?
Yeah, and I think people are going to think about this king and the way he's handled relations now with one of his sons and one of his brothers, and that's going to be part of his legacy. But I actually thought this particular statement by the king was appropriate. He should stay out of it. Government officials should stay out of it. I've been critical in the United States about government officials piping up too much during prosecutions. So I think the king saying this is going to be carried out like any other criminal matter, and I'm not going to say anything more about it, and my family is going to go about doing our royal duties, I actually think that's probably exactly right.
Before I let you go, this is the big part. Is this going to spark the United States Department of Justice or any, U.S. Attorney's Office to do something, right? Because people will say, look at the UK. They're going after the highest of the high. How come we're not seeing an investigation or criminal charges against anybody here in the United States? Now, on one hand, I've talked about this before, based on case summaries and internal memos in the Epstein files, they have said there was no videos or photographs of other people abusing young girls other than Epstein and Maxwell. But could there be an investigation into something else that's not related to sex crimes? And the problem I see is I wonder if this will spark the DOJ basically on public pressure to do something more. I don't know if there's anything more. But also, we can't forget that it was last summer when the DOJ and the FBI released a memo saying, quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties." So essentially, they'd have to go back on that statement unless they say, hey, that was with respect to sex crimes. There might be something else to look at here. I don't know. Got to ask you.
Yeah, I think that the fact that this is happening in the UK, well, first of all, he's not a public official anymore. He's an ex-former official. So this would be, to me, more like if they went ahead and prosecuted Bill Clinton. He's an ex-president. He's not in power. I mean, he holds some influence, but he's not in power. And so that would be the analogy to me,
Right.
not going after people who are currently in power. I think there's very little chance that DOJ, which is the legal department now of the people in power, would go after the people in power.
Right.
That's just not the way it's set up. That's not what DOJ has become. I don't see any way that changes unless down the road, there's a change in who's in charge of DOJ. The only way to change what DOJ does is to change who's in charge. And, people will have a chance to do that at the ballot box in some manner this year, and then they'll have another chance in a couple of years. And that's the only thing. I don't think what happens in England is going to, it'll be the subject for a lot of discussion like the one we're having, but it's not going to amount to a change in the way business is done here.
Rich Schoenstein, thanks so much for coming on and jumping on so quickly to do this breaking news. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. We'll keep an eye on this one, huh?
Absolutely. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also follow us on NBC's Peacock. We have Sidebar episodes up there too. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.